Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the articles that we are going to take up for discussion. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 4 articles which are extremely important for the mains exam in particular, and we have 3 small articles that are very important for the prelims examination. So let's analyze all these topics one by one as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiatives, do support us through your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's look at the first article for today. From page number 8, I am going to take up this column which is very important for Indian polity. In this article, the writer, Faizan Mustafa, is talking about the constitutional ethos, especially regarding freedom of religion in the country. And he is examining what constitutes essential religious practices and how often they run into conflict with our constitutionally guaranteed rights with regard to freedom of religion. Now, before we explore this article, I have a very important announcement. For the 2025 aspirants who are preparing for the next year's attempt, Unacademy IAS is launching new batches in Hindi, bilingual, and as well as in English medium. The new online classroom program has just begun and you can enroll for these classes at just $24,999. So would you wish to enroll? Please click on the link provided in the description and make use of this offer which is being provided. And also please note, we are offering optional classes as well. You can look at our top expert faculties from across subjects and language mediums who will be taking up these optional classes. From English, for example, we have Mukesh Jha sir taking up geography, Abhishek Mishra sir taking up history, and Hima Bindu ma'am taking up anthropology. So would you wish to enroll for the optional classes? Do contact Unacademy by using the number and the link provided in the description. So with this, let's get started with the discussion and let's look at the argument being presented by the writer in this column. So Faizan Mustafa places a very interesting and a very important argument. The writer is arguing that when it comes to essential religious practices, the judiciary should not play the role of clergy while determining aspects of theological importance. Essentially, the writer is against the interference of the courts when it comes to interpretation of essential religious practices, because the courts have often been inconsistent when it comes to interpreting what constitutes an essential religious practice. The writer wants the constitution to be given supremacy, and if any religious practice, irrespective of which religion it is from, if it is in conflict with our constitutional ethos and values and morals, then according to the writer, these practices should be set aside. They should be prohibited in order to protect the progressive ideals of the Indian state. That is the essential argument the writer is making. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and let's understand what does the constitution say about religion, freedom of religion, what exactly constitutes an essential religious practice, and who determines as to what practice is essential or integral to a certain religion. Now, first of all, please understand that religion and spirituality, they both are integral and central to all human activity. Since time immemorial, humans in general, we are either religious or spiritual in some way or the other. It's not just about following a particular religion or a particular practice. Irrespective of what you follow, what you believe in, it is agreed that since time immemorial, humans do have a tendency to be religious, to be spiritual, and sometimes this turns towards superstition as well. There are possibilities where religious practices, customs, rituals, which are seen as essential to a certain religion, could be given a different connotation over a period of time, and it might take up a tendency to acquire superstitious tones, which could hurt public morality, health, or it could even compromise public order. So if you look at the Indian Constitution, the Constitution of India upholds freedom of religion under Article 25 to 28. Under fundamental rights, from Article 25 to 28, right to freedom of religion is guaranteed through the Constitution. For example, we have Article 25 that guarantees the right to practice, profess, propagate your religion. Then you have Article 26 that gives you the freedom to manage religious affairs. Article 27 that provides you freedom from paying taxes for promotion of any particular religion. Essentially, it prohibits the state from using public money, taxpayers' money, to promote a certain religion. And Article 28 gives you the freedom from attending religious instruction at places of worship, educational institutions, etc. So these articles collectively, they comprise the right to freedom of religion enshrined in the Indian Constitution. But however, these are not absolute rights. In fact, according to the writer, freedom of religion has been subordinated to other fundamental rights that exist in the Constitution. There are few restrictions that apply with regard to freedom of religion. If a certain religious practice poses a threat to public order, or if it threatens morality, or if it poses a health concern, if any religious practice or ritual or custom raises a potential health concern, then such practices cannot be claimed as one's right to freedom of religion. Of course, if you look at the principle of secularism, the Western principle of secularism is vastly different from the Indian version of secularism that was adopted by the constitution framers of India. If you look at the Western model of secularism, their secularism is about a complete separation between the state and the church. But in the Indian context, a very unique adaptation of secularism is seen through our constitution and its principles and ethos. In India, the constitution provides for a better harmony between religious beliefs and practices and the constitutional values and principles. It's a better synchronization as compared to the Western world. And that's why when you talk about Indian secularism, you always see a positive connotation as compared to complete separation of religion and the state. We have Article 29, Article 30, which also protects minority rights, including religious minority rights. So it allows the state, the constitution allows the state to play a role in religious affairs in certain instances. It does not call for a complete separation as such, as seen in the Western context. And that is where the Indian constitution does set itself apart when it comes to freedom of religion. But now the question is, within a certain religion, be it Hinduism, be it Islam, be it Christianity or any other religion, the question is, what practices constitute to be known as essential religious practices? In the name of essential religious practice, can you follow any ritual, any tradition or custom, even if it is causing certain adverse impact on the society? That is the big question. This question has been tackled by our judiciary from many, many years. In fact, the very context of this article is one such case that was recently reported in Tamil Nadu. In Tamil Nadu, there is a temple in the Nerur village. In the Nerur village, there is a temple in Tamil Nadu where there is a practice where the devotees of the temple, they roll on the plantain leaves on which the Brahmins of that village have consumed the food, the prasadam, which is offered in the temple. Now, this practice is not just seen in Tamil Nadu, it is seen in few other temples in southern India as well. Some of you might know that there is a temple in Karnataka as well, which was also in the news, and this particular issue also had reached the Supreme Court a few years ago. In this temple in Karnataka, there is this ritual, this practice which is followed. It's often called the Anga Pradakshinam, where the devotees roll their bodies on the plantain leaves on which food has been consumed, the prasadam has been consumed by the Brahmins, the priests and the clerical class of the local village. So this happens to be a local religious custom associated with these specific temples in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And one such case had reached the doorsteps of the Madras High Court. Because few years ago, the Supreme Court of India had banned this practice of Anga Pradashanam in this temple in Karnataka. So, at the Madras High Court, a case had come up where a devotee was arguing that this practice, this ritual, is integral to his right to life. It is integral to his right to practice his religion, to profess and propagate his religion. He also argued that this is integral to his right to privacy. And he even argued that this is integral to his right to freedom of movement, which is guaranteed under Article 19. So this petitioner, Praveen Kumar, approached the Madras High Court asking for directions to allow this practice, the Anga Pradashanam practice, to be continued. But however, in the case of Karnataka, when the case had reached the Supreme Court had banned this practice as it was seen as discriminatory against Dalits and other backward classes. The allegation against this ritual was that caste discrimination was very inherent in this practice. In this practice where people from other lower castes are rolling over the plantain leaves on which food has been consumed by the Brahmins, it reeks of caste hierarchy, and on these grounds the practice had been banned, and also it does raise a healthcare concern as well. So the Supreme Court of India, which had intervened earlier in the case regarding the temple in Karnataka, had banned the practice of Anga Pradashanam. But this petitioner N. Praveen Kumar approached the Madras High Court for relief, approaching the judiciary and asking for his right to be protected, his fundamental right to practice his religion, to uphold his right to life and his right to privacy as well, along with his right to movement. So previously in 2015, the Madras High Court had banned the Anga Pradashanam practice. But now the petitioner who had appealed against it has secured a new order from the Madras High Court. Justice Swaminathan, who was heading this bench at the Madras High Court, has ruled in favor of the petitioner, allowing the practice of Anga Pradashanam to be continued in this temple in the Nerur village in Tamil Nadu. So this, according to the writer, revives the debate regarding what constitutes religion, what constitutes essential religious practice, what religious customs are integral to a certain faith. Who will determine this? Should it be the judiciary? Should it be the constitution? Should it be the devotees? Or should it be just the religious texts? This question has always plagued the Indian society. There have been many such cases where religious practices, the so-called essential religious practices, have run into conflict with constitutional principles and ethos. And quite often the judiciary has stepped in and has interpreted religious practices. So this is where the writer disapproves of the role of the judiciary, because the judiciary has often failed to be consistent. The writer is presenting different cases from the past and is pointing out how the judiciary lacks the consistency. He is urging the judiciary to not play the role of the clergy, to not interpret religious texts, which essentially would undermine the constitutional values and principles and thus could undermine a progressive India. So in this context, let's take a look at some previous judgments, some previous rulings of the Supreme Court and some important High Court judgments that deal with essential religious practices. What has the court said about certain essential religious practices and how has the interpretation been by the courts? If you look at the petitioner's argument, P. Naveen Kumar, who was the petitioner in this case with regard to the practice in Tamil Nadu, his argument was very simple, very logical as well, that by banning Anga Pradashanam, Madras High Court has snatched away his right, his fundamental right to practice religion under Article 25, his right to life under Article 21, and as well as his right to freedom of movement under Article 19. And he even argued that right to privacy under Article 21, which was declared as a fundamental right in the case, Puttaswamy case, would also be compromised, because if the court rulings do not allow a devotee to practice a certain religious custom, then it could compromise these essential fundamental rights according to the petitioner. So Justice Swaminathan, who was heading this bench at the Madras High Court, agreed with the petitioner and set aside the previous rulings of the Madras High Court and even the Supreme Court in the context of the temple in Karnataka, and set aside these previous rulings and upheld the right of the devotee to continue the practice of Anga Pradhakshinam and interpreted this as an essential religious practice. Now the question is, on what basis, on what evidence has the judge taken this stand? There has to be a certain evidence-based rule making or judicial interpretation based on which the judiciary should arrive at such conclusions. If you look at the Indian Constitution, as I was discussing, the framers of the Indian Constitution ensured that your fundamental rights related to freedom of religion, they are in a way subordinate to other fundamental rights. When it comes to right to equality, if you look at even right to freedom of expression, if you look at the restrictions that are placed on freedom of religion, there are a lot of restrictions which essentially makes sure that right to religion is kept subordinate to other essential fundamental rights. The state can interfere in religious practices, can make certain rules in the interest of social reforms. For example, you can't practice the sati system by stating that it's an essential integral practice in Hindu religion, right? Similarly, you can't take up such retrograde practices in be it Christianity, Islam or Hinduism and claim that it is an integral part of religion and hence I have a fundamental right to practice this particular custom. So in the interest of social reforms, the state can intervene, the state has the additional powers to do that. And the courts also have restricted essential religious practices time and again. But the question is, there is a lot of subjectivity that is involved over here, a lot of scope provided for the courts, for the judges to determine as to what practice constitutes essential religious practice. So to bring in objectivity, there has to be consistency that should be maintained by the courts. And that is the problem the writer is highlighting. The writer states that if you look at previous judgments of the Supreme Court and the subsequent orders of the high courts as well, there is no consistency at all. There is no evidence-based decision making. There is no rational way of, objective way of approaching this sensitive issue. And hence the writer says the Constitution provides a rational way of deciding on these issues. The Constitution should be supreme. The constitutional principles and ethos should be supreme over any essential religious practice claimed by the devotees of a certain faith. This is the core argument that the writer is making. The writer talks about a certain argument presented by Justice Swaminathan in this recent case in Tamil Nadu, which is actually a very interesting counter argument. Justice Swaminathan, who ruled in favor of the petitioner and allowed the practice of Anga Pradhakshinam to be continued, he identified a very important constitutional and legal question. He stated that if right to privacy of a citizen can include one's gender and sexual orientation, why shouldn't this include one's spiritual orientation as well? Just like we can claim that my right to identify my gender or my sexual orientation is part of my right to privacy, similarly, the right of any individual to claim a certain spiritual orientation can also be seen as integral to right to privacy, which is a very valid legal argument. So this was indeed recognized by Justice Swaminathan while passing this ruling. But however, the important point being raised by the writer is that Justice Swaminathan has failed to look at the evidence, to look at the religious texts, because there is absolutely no such evidence to point out that Anga Pradhakshinam, the practice where devotees, usually from Dalit community and OBC community, they roll over the plantain leaves on which food has been consumed by the Brahmins. There is no mention of this practice being an essential religious practice in Hinduism. Of course, the petitioners did argue that there are few local texts, religious texts, which quote and cite this particular custom. But in general, if you don't find this custom in other parts of India, right, and if you don't find this across other temples in India, clearly it is not to be seen as an essential religious practice in Hinduism. And the writer also points out that since there is a constitutional restriction, that if a religious practice poses a threat to health, then definitely it can be restricted, because the practice of devotees rolling over plantain leaves on which food has been consumed by someone else is indeed unhygienic, unhealthy, which could lead to the spread of diseases. On these grounds, the court ideally should have struck down such practices and customs. So now the writer is presenting previous cases and judgments to highlight the inconsistency of the courts. Essentially, the writer is making a one-sided argument, right? I do acknowledge it's a one-sided argument because it is indeed a controversial topic and there are different angles to this particular discussion. So if you look at what the writer is talking about, the writer says that previously the courts have not shown consistency while interpreting what constitutes an essential religious practice. Hence, the writer's fundamental point here is that the courts should not play the role of the clergy. They should not interpret religious texts. They should not step into that role. Instead, they should hold the constitution to be supreme. They should uphold the constitutional ethos and principles. And if any religious practice is contradictory to a constitutional principle, it has to be struck down. It has to be restricted. If you look at the 1954 Supreme Court judgment on freedom of religion in the Sri Shirur Mutt case, the Supreme Court had ruled that Article 25 guarantees freedom of religion not only to entertain such religious belief as approved by one's judgment and conscience, but also to exhibit such belief outwardly in one's behavior. In this particular ruling, the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of belief and faith. The Supreme Court had said that freedom of religion is not just about one's conscience, or it's not just about one's internal spirituality. It's about one's external display of religious commitment, which is through such customs, rituals, and traditions. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court had given primacy to religious practices, and it essentially laid the foundation for interpreting most religious customs as integral to a certain religion, which led to a lot of erroneous judgments being passed later on. But if you look at the Ajmer Dargah judgment of 1961, over here, the court did not recognize religious practices as an integral part of religion, in this particular case being Islam. And while passing this ruling in the Ajmer Dargah judgment, the court did not rely on any religious text. It did not look at any evidence-based decision making. For example, if you look at other cases where religious customs have been seen as integral to a certain religion, various Vedic texts or Puranas or other documents, religious documents, have been relied upon, and the core doctrine of the religion has been used, the religious philosophy of a religion has been used by the courts while passing such judgments. But in certain cases, there are instances where the courts have not really relied upon any such religious text, but rather they have been guided by the public opinion and they have passed certain judgments which might be contradictory to constitutional principles. There was another interesting case in 2014 where a certain tribal community was arguing that during the Nag Panchami festival, they argued that it's an essential religious practice of their faith to catch hold of a live cobra and to worship it. They even quoted a religious text, the Srinath Leelamrut, which mentions this practice. But later the court struck down this practice because nowhere in the Dharma Shastra it is mentioned that you should catch a live cobra during Naga Panchami and worship the live cobra. This is clearly a public hazard. It is endangering our species as well. It's a threat to the environment. So this practice was struck down in the Gram Sabha of village Batish Shirala case of 2014, and this is where the court relied on certain religious documents to strike down a religious practice as not an essential religious practice. In another case, the Muhammad Fasi case of 1985, where a Muslim police officer from Kerala police had approached the court arguing for his right to grow a beard, and he argued that growing a beard is an essential practice in Islam. But here the court did not rely upon the available religious texts, and it said that growing a beard in Islam is just a noble, pious act recommended by the Hadith, which contains the sayings of the Prophet, and it's not an essential religious practice as it is not mandatory in the Quran. So by such an interpretation, the court did not protect the right of this police officer, whereas in other cases, religious texts have been used to recognize even obscure religious customs as part of a certain religion, as an essential practice of a certain religion. So this lack of consistency is what concerns the writer. Even in the latest hijab controversy, the courts have relied on similar practices where hijab was found to be not mandatory, as it is not made mandatory in the Quran, and it has been not seen as an essential religious practice. Even with regard to Christianity, there have been certain cases where such inconsistency has been seen in the interpretation of the courts. So here the final argument of the writer is that it's not about which religion, it's not about Hinduism, Islam or Christianity. It's about religious practices, the concern they pose for a progressive society, and where should the constitution stand. So whenever there is such a conflict between constitutional principles and religious practices, the writer's argument is that judges should not play the role of the clergy. They should not examine theological questions, that is not their job. They should uphold the supremacy of the constitution. Constitutional ethos and principles should be supreme over any religious text, be it a Hindu religious text or an Islamic text or a Christian text. That is the core argument being presented by the writer, but I do agree that it is just one side of the argument that the writer is presenting. Because in diverse set of religions, there could be number of customs and practices which are integral to that particular temple or a particular community or a particular region, right? So this is indeed a debatable topic, and I would like to know your opinion as well. And kindly let me know what you think about this issue in the comment section. Do comment below and let me know what you think about this. Do let me know what is your thought, what is your opinion about this sensitive topic, and do let me know that in the comments. Now, before we proceed to the next topic, let's take up a practice question. Let's take up a question on this topic and let's try to understand how you can build an answer to this question. This question is asking, examine the conflict between constitutional ethos and essential religious practices. So you can begin your answer with a good introduction about what the Constitution of India says about freedom of religion. That would be a good introduction as you are setting the tone for your answer. Since the question is asking you about the conflict between constitutional ethos and principles and essential religious practices, there are many examples that you can rely upon. So since we are going to discuss these issues in the body of the answer, the introduction should be about the constitutional principles, Article 25 to 28, a brief mention of the constitutional principles on freedom of religion, how it is not an absolute right, how there are certain restrictions. You can even mention that the constitution framers ensured that these fundamental rights related to freedom of religion are subordinate to some of the other fundamental rights. You can also mention that the state can interfere in religion in order to initiate social reforms. The state can even promote certain religious practices and customs. The courts can also step in. So the state and the courts do have a role in interpreting and in protecting your freedom of religion. So once you set the context, once you mention what the Constitution states about religion, then in the body, you can start discussing about essential religious practices and how often they run into conflict with the constitutional principles. Take up the example of the hijab controversy, the Anga Pradakshinam controversy in the temples of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, and there are many more such examples. Take up the Shrirur Mutt case, which I cited, where the Supreme Court actually ruled in favor of religious practices, where the Supreme Court recognized that religion is not just about one's personal belief, it's also about outward projection of religious faith and practices and customs. Now throw that into a conflict with the other argument, for example seen in the Supreme Court's ruling, where the Supreme Court banned Anga Pradakshinam practice in Karnataka on the grounds of caste discrimination and also on the grounds of concerns for health. So present the conflicting argument and bring up the latest case from Tamil Nadu as well, where the bench headed by Justice Swaminathan at the Madras High Court has ruled in favor of the petitioner, P. Naveen Kumar, and recognized his right to privacy, his right to religion, his right to spirituality, and allowed the practice of Anga Pradakshina. So present these arguments, but then you can state that the courts have been inconsistent in this interpretation. After presenting certain cases to show the conflict between essential religious practices and customs and constitutional principles, you can state that the judiciary has not always been consistent in such rulings. In some cases, the judiciary has relied upon the doctrine of a religion, the religious texts of a certain religion, but in certain cases, it has not really based its orders on evidence and the religious texts. This inconsistency could affect the rights of the citizens. It could even essentially enable superstitious beliefs to be promoted and practiced, which could be harmful for the society. So finally, you can conclude by stating that constitutional supremacy is what is necessary in a progressive society. While it's important to protect freedom of religion, one's right to faith and belief, it's very important to uphold the supremacy of the Constitution even over essential religious practices. So that is a core point that you can bring out in the conclusion as a way forward, and you can mention that as far as possible, the judiciary should not play the role of clergy. It should not get into the theological questions, and it should allow the Constitution to be supreme and constitutional ethos and principles to reign supreme over religious practices. So that could conclude your answer. Now let's look at the next topic. I'm going to talk about some important political changes that have taken place in Europe. We have multiple articles in today's newspaper on page number 1, page number 8, and also on page number 14 that deal with the recent political changes that have taken place in United Kingdom and also across Europe. Now, some of you might be wondering, how is this relevant for India? Of course, the political developments are not relevant for India. It's not even relevant for the exam. But the political changes happening in another country, in a critical region like Europe, does have it does have a direct impact on India's foreign policy. It has an impact on India's national interests. So we will only examine the implications of these political changes happening in Europe on India's foreign policy interests. So talking about United Kingdom, recently elections were held. I'm sure many of you would know the results of the elections as well. Rishi Sunak from the Conservative Party, right, has lost the election. Rishi Sunak was the first British Prime Minister of Asian origin with Indian ancestry, and Rishi Sunak in a way represented a strong Indian diasporic connect with United Kingdom. So Rishi Sunak's party, the Conservative Party, after being in power for almost 14 years, has lost power, and the Labour Party has emerged victorious. The Conservative Party, also called the Tories, they represent the right of centre as far as UK's political spectrum is concerned. So the right of centre has lost, and the Labour Party, which represents the centre left, has won the elections with a decisive mandate, and the UK has finally got a new Prime Minister. See, the last 14 years have been very turbulent in the United Kingdom because there have been 5 different Prime Ministers who have come and gone from the Conservative Party itself. UK's economy has stagnated. There is a crisis in its healthcare sector, in its education sector. Its economy has saturated. Its economy is on the decline. Plus, the UK has dealt with many other challenges, including social challenges posed by illegal migration. Plus, the UK is dealing with global issues from climate change to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And more importantly, UK's relations with India, UK's relations with European Union. These are very important aspects as far as India's foreign policy is concerned as well. So whichever party that comes to power, the new leadership, their priorities will have an impact on Indian interests in UK and in Europe. So India primarily has been negotiating a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. You should note that India and UK share a comprehensive strategic partnership. The UK is a strategic partner for India. Both countries have established a comprehensive strategic partnership. and we share very important trade relations, security relations. We work closely in the field of climate change. The issue of immigration is a critical issue for India because every year thousands of Indians, especially students and Indian workers, they seek entry into the UK to study, work, to get employment visas, etc. Plus, the UK also faces a lot of illegal migration from India, and this remains a concern for UK as well. So there are major defining issues in the India-UK relationship. We have a strong defense relationship as well, very strong intelligence cooperation, counter-terrorism cooperation, even in the field of science and technology, renewable energy, and in the field of finance, investments. India, UK are very close partners of each other. UK is a financial hub, London in particular. UK can bring in billions of dollars worth of investments into the Indian market. India is a key provider of cheap labor. Indian students, Indian workers are key contributors to the economy of UK. There is a strong Indian diaspora in the country which culturally connects India and United Kingdom. So the relations are very crucial, and UK is one of the key power centers of Europe. So as you all know, the UK has exited from the European Union following Brexit, which was a referendum that was conducted in 2016 by the previous conservative regime. The previous conservative government, which was in power, conducted the Brexit referendum in 2016, which led to the exit of UK from European Union. Post-Brexit, the mishandling of the economy and the deal with European Union was the primary reason why the Conservative Party lost the popular support. Rishi Sunak and his predecessors, the previous prime ministers, right, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, they've all been heavily criticized by the people of Britain for the poor handling of the economy, for the poor handling of the COVID-19 crisis, and for the poor handling of the post-Brexit scenario. Post-Brexit deals between UK and EU led to critical shortage of items in the UK. UK's economy has been suffering and stagnating, as I was pointing out, and public spending has gone down significantly on healthcare and education. So these are severe challenges that UK is facing. So the next government which is coming in, the Labour Party under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, will face these challenges, and the Labour Party is looking forward to take the relationship with India to the next level, as it realizes that India will be a critical partner to help revive the economy of the United Kingdom. There are critical areas of collaboration that we are looking forward to. But at the same time, there are some pressing issues and challenges that could derail the relationship as well. Because if you look at the Labour Party and its position on certain issues related to India, it is quite problematic. Especially with regard to the Kashmir issue. The Labour Party's previous position has been problematic for India. It has often crossed a red line for India. Back in 1997, the then Labour Party minister, who was the foreign secretary back then, had suggested a mediation between India and Pakistan, where UK would act as a mediator to help resolve the Kashmir issue. Now, this position of the UK under the Labour government was unacceptable to India, because India does not accept any third-party involvement in the Kashmir issue. Since the Shimla Agreement of 1972, signed after the 1971 war, India has always stated that Kashmir issue is a bilateral issue. It has to be discussed only between India and Pakistan, and the two countries will have to resolve it bilaterally. There is no scope for any third-party involvement. India does not entertain the involvement of UK, US or UN or any other third party. So this position of the Labour Party historically has been problematic for India. Even recently, after India revoked the special status of J&K under Article 370, the Labour Party MPs in the British Parliament adopted a resolution criticizing India of committing human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. So these positions of Labour Party leaders has been problematic for India in the past. So India would be very cautious about dealing with the new Labour Party-led government. But however, if you look at the manifesto of the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, while he was leading the Labour Party in the election, the manifesto that he brought out shows a renewed approach towards India. So in this manifesto, the Labour Party leader, who is now the British Prime Minister, recognized the importance of India-UK relations. He pledged to reform UK's approach towards India, Labour Party's approach towards India, and to build a strategic partnership with India. So there is a positive opening that is available, and this could set the tone for finalizing the free trade agreement, which has been pending for more than 2 years. The Rishi Sunak government and the previous prime ministers under the Conservative government, they could not finalize the FTA. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson had promised that before Diwali deadline, before the Diwali festival, FTA would be finalized with India. But multiple Diwalis have come and gone, but still there is no FTA between India and UK. But now that both India and UK have new governments in place following recent elections, it could provide a new opening for both the governments to prioritize these issues, starting with a free trade agreement. This could increase Indian exports to UK. UK and Europe is a huge export market for India. It could boost Indian exports. It could help India receive investments from UK. It could help in transfer of technology, because UK is a hub of high-end technology and India would be able to readily access the high-end technology from the UK. Other areas of collaboration would be climate change. The UK has committed for net zero emissions by 2045, and it is looking to bring down its emissions, switch towards clean renewable energy, which is also a priority for India. Plus, India is concerned about the carbon tax that UK is also proposing, which is similar to the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the European Union has implemented. This could adversely hurt Indian exports to the UK. Any such carbon tax which will penalize certain products, certain imports which have a higher carbon footprint, could hurt Indian producers, Indian farmers, Indian MSME industry. So that is a concern which we need to resolve. So all these priority issues will be taken up by the two new governments in India and in the United Kingdom. Then the issue of immigration, the visa related difficulties being faced by Indian students and Indian workers. It has become incredibly difficult for Indians to get a visa from UK, and it has adversely affected Indian migrant workers. And also UK is concerned about illegal migration from India. There has been large scale illegal migration from certain parts of India in the recent years. Many Western countries are deeply concerned about this. So these would be priority issues along with defense, security and counter-terrorism cooperation. The UK is also a key partner in the Indo-Pacific. The UK is a key defense and intelligence partner in the Indo-Pacific region, because even the UK sees the rise of China as a threat. So it's again a common point, a common issue that will bring India-UK together. And we have many joint military exercises between our armies, navies and air force. There is extensive defense collaboration between our defense industries. There is intelligence cooperation between our intelligence agencies, especially to counter terrorism. Now this is where India has a specific concern. The rise of pro-Khalistani elements and the pro-Pakistani and pro-Kashmiri separatist elements. This remains a red line for India, because the UK has become a fertile ground for several separatist forces. The pro-Khalistani and pro-Kashmiri separatist forces, who are often backed by Pakistani state actors, remain a concern. Because recently you might have seen how the Indian High Commission in London was targeted by pro-Khalistani extremists, and UK authorities failed to act against them. So this has been a point of friction, and obviously all these issues are going to be looked at with two new governments being in place. So there could be a FTA which could be finalized very soon. There could be further expansion of the trade relations, the strategic relations, the defense relations, and India would be looking at how the Labour Party-led government would work with India on core security concerns like the revival of Khalistan movement and the other activities, anti-India activities that Pakistan promotes in other countries. These would be priority issues along with the visa immigration related issues. So that is what we can anticipate as far as India-UK relations are concerned. Now, there is one other important point that we can take away from some of these articles, which are mentioned on page 1, page number 8 and page number 14. These articles are referring to a trend, a shift which is happening in not just UK but also across Europe, where we are seeing the resurgence of the far right as far as European politics is concerned. So we have a column in today's newspaper where the writer is talking about the revival of neo-fascism, the rise of fascist ideology, far right-wing extremist ideology, which poses a concern not just for Europe but the entire world. Because almost a century ago, the rise of fascist ideology is what laid the foundation for the Second World War. The rise of fascist regimes in Germany, in Italy, the Nazi party under Adolf Hitler, Mussolini in Italy, etc., is what triggered and laid the foundation for the World War. So in many ways, we are seeing a similar trend of sorts, where we are seeing a revival of far right-wing extremist ideology in Europe, especially on the issue of immigration. See, Europe has received large influx of refugees, asylum seekers and illegal migrants. This has created social issues and security issues across Europe, from Africa, from West Asia, from South Asia as well. Lakhs of illegal migrants, refugees and asylum seekers are headed towards Europe, and they are crossing European borders illegally. So some of the illegal migrants have created social security problems, and this has become a major social issue in the European context. So there are a lot of sentiments against illegal migrants and refugees, and as a result, this is getting reflected in European politics as well. Those parties, especially far right-wing extremist parties, which take an anti-immigration position, they are getting more support from the citizens, and this trend is clearly evident. For example, if you look at the recent elections to the EU Parliament, recently to the European Parliament elections were held. Even here we saw a resurgence of the far right-wing extremist groups. For example, you might have heard about the AfD party in Germany. Then look at Italy. Italy became the first European country in a century to elect a far right-wing leader, Meloni. After Mussolini, right? Meloni is the next European leader, right, from Italy to be elected, who belongs to far right-wing extremist ideology and advocates neo-fascist ideology. We are seeing a revival of such tendencies even in Portugal, in Spain, in France and Germany as well. Recently in France, you might have read that French President Emmanuel Macron has called for snap elections because far right-wing extremist parties made a big gain over the more liberal progressive parties. So France is headed towards elections. So this trend of rising far right-wing extremism and the support for such political parties is of concern, and especially for countries like India, because the rise of such anti-immigration parties to power could affect immigration policies, and it could directly affect India. It could lead to more xenophobia, racism, and targeting of minorities on the grounds of ethnicity, color, race, etc. So countries like India, which have a very strong diaspora in the Europe, could face the adverse impact, and hence India would be closely watching these political changes that are taking place in Europe. This article also mentions the same. In the UK, far right-wing and even far left-wing parties have increased their vote share. The far right-wing parties have mainly campaigned on the basis of their anti-immigration approach. They take a strong approach against immigration. They promise that they will put an end to refugee flow and the flow of illegal migrants. That is how they largely seek populist votes. But even far left-wing parties, by promoting environmental issues, by promoting issues related to climate change and global warming, they are coming into power by promising radical measures to deal with climate change. Any such radical measures by, let's say, a far left-wing government could adversely affect India's trade with the European region. Even though these measures might be necessary on environmental grounds, if it is not well thought out, if it is not a balanced taxation measure, any such green tax or carbon tax could end up hurting our trade and economic interests. So India has a lot at stake in Europe because it's one of the largest markets for India. Europe is a huge export destination for India. Plus, it is home to a large Indian diaspora community. So all these developments related to climate change related issues, anti-immigration related developments, the rise of far right-wing and even few far left-wing extremist parties, this remains a concern for India, and hence even UPSC aspirants should be at least aware of these developments. Because as part of our IR syllabus, UPSC does prioritize such topics. It might ask you the trends in Europe, the political trends, and how it could impact India's ties with Europe. So look at this practice question. Discuss the prospects that lie ahead for India-UK relations following the recent elections in both countries. Now, I expect you guys to write an answer for this question. I'll not discuss this because I've already given you the discussion for the previous question. So you have an idea as to how to build the answer. So using the points that I've mentioned, try to please write an answer for this and try to post that answer in the comment section below. Now let's look at article number 3. This article from page 10 talks about Prime Minister Modi's upcoming visit to Russia. It's a historic visit. PM Modi is visiting Russia for a couple of days, and India-Russia summit will be held on the 8th and 9th of July. Of course, we are going to be covering these developments in detail, but I just want to provide an update. See, there has been a lot of concern amongst Western countries that India has not criticized Russia till date for its aggression against Ukraine. As you all know, India has never taken a critical position against Russia, right? India has even ignored the Western sanctions, the G7 sanctions against Russia. We have bypassed the Western sanctions and even continued importing Russian defense equipment and Russian oil. And today, India has become one of the largest buyers of Russian oil. In fact, a large part of our trade relationship between India and Russia today is made up of the oil imports that India has been making from Russia. So this growing closeness between India and Russia has raised concern for Western countries, and Western countries are closely watching the upcoming visit of Prime Minister Modi to Russia. So PM Modi is all set to interact with Russian President Putin, and this is going to be a key diplomatic event. You need to watch out for this important development. This is going to be very relevant for our exams. Because see, parallelly, the NATO summit is also being held in the United States. The US is hosting the 75th anniversary of the raising of NATO, which is a military alliance that was set up in the Cold War days after the Second World War, with the intention to primarily target the Soviet Union-led communist bloc. Ever since the end of Cold War, even after the collapse of Soviet Union, NATO has been a military alliance of the Western countries primarily aimed at Russia. Its primary intention has been to contain Russia. So NATO is marking its 75th anniversary, and NATO countries have all aligned together to target Russia and impose sanctions on Russia, and they're even backing Ukraine openly, directly, by supplying arms, weapons and funds. So given the simultaneous events that are happening, it's very important to observe the developments that will be reported during PM Modi's interaction with Russian President Putin. Western countries had raised a concern about the timing of the visit, that on the very day when US is hosting the NATO summit, the 75th anniversary of NATO, on the very same day, Indian PM is visiting Moscow. So symbolically, it does not play for good optics, but India's foreign ministry has clarified that there is no intention from India to play West against Russia. India follows the policy of multi-alignment. We are aligned with Russia, we are aligned with Western countries as well. As quoted by India's foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, India works only for its own interests. In fact, in international relations, every country works for its own national interests. So if our interests are served by Russia, US and others, we will work with all those countries without choosing sides, right? So India's policy of multi-alignment is what allows India to work with these different conflicting powers. So apart from the core issues related to Russia-Ukraine conflict, the sanctions, there are many other important aspects that India-Russia will be discussing during this visit. For example, we have the civil nuclear energy cooperation between India and Russia. I hope you know that Russia is the only country which is operating nuclear plants in India at Kundankulam in Tamil Nadu, where Russian nuclear reactors are powering a nuclear power plant. So India would be looking forward to take this relationship further, to further expand India-Russia civil nuclear cooperation. Then we have space cooperation, especially the Gaganyaan mission, where Russia is playing a key role in supporting ISRO, especially with regard to training the Indian astronauts. Then we also collaborate extensively with regard to defense. Russia remains the top supplier of military hardware to India. It has supplied the S-400 air defense system. Recently, despite the sanctions, India has continued the defense trade and even the oil trade with Russia by bypassing the Western sanctions. So this clearly highlights the importance that India attaches to its relations with Russia. So we need to look forward to these developments. So I'm just setting the stage for the next few days. There will be many more articles related to India-Russia relations, the visit of PM Modi to Russia, and how it plays out with our relations with Western countries. So we will examine the topic again in greater detail once we have some new updates. But I think today we can just set the context for the coming events of the week. Next, we have another article on page number 10 regarding India's defense industry. The Ministry of Defense presented some data yesterday regarding the phenomenal growth of India's domestic defense industry. According to the data, India's domestic indigenous defense production has touched 1.27 lakh crore rupees. Now, this is a phenomenal growth of 16.7% as compared to the previous fiscal. So this points towards a significant jump in domestic defense production. India is no longer just an importer of defense goods and defense technologies. Today we are a major producer, that too indigenous producer of domestic defense components. So this jump in defense production has been led not just by the defense PSUs like HAL and others, but also by other public sector units from Bharat Electronics to BHEL. They have played a critical role and they account for nearly 79.2% of the total indigenous defense production that has happened. The rest has come from the private industry. This is very significant. Private defense players have started playing a significant role. They already account for 19 to 20% of our defense production in value terms. From the Tata to Reliance to Adani to many other small startups, private defense industry is playing a critical role, and this massive expansion in defense indigenization is possible due to the reforms introduced by the government. The Modi government in particular has liberalized the defense sector, opened up the space for private defense companies, and promoted initiatives like Make in India, then focused on making India self-reliant, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So such incentives, such reforms, such initiatives led by the government, led by the defense ministry, led by the defense PSUs, has put India's defense industry on a completely different trajectory. You also see a significant jump in India's defense exports. India is no longer just an importer of defense equipment. Today we are one of the major exporters of defense equipment. According to the data, our defense exports have touched 21,000 crores for the previous fiscal. This is almost a 32% jump compared to the previous fiscal. We are exporting defense and military hardware to many countries, from Philippines to even Armenia. So many countries are partnering with India. India is procuring technology from abroad, developing indigenous technology as well, increasing domestic defense production, and this is going to make India self-reliant. So initiatives like Make in India and the overall liberalization of the defense sector, especially with regard to FDI reforms, which allowed greater FDI to be brought in to the defense sector, has encouraged the private industries. The support provided to the private defense companies and defense startups from the government, from the armed forces, has been phenomenal. The focus on making India self-reliant, the focus on making India Atmanirbhar, these initiatives deserve the credit for the significant jump that we have seen in indigenous defense production and also the jump that we are seeing in defense exports from India. So with this, we complete all the mains related articles, and now let's take a quick look at the prelim section. On page number 6, we have this article related to the African swine fever. A new outbreak of this deadly infectious disease has been reported in Kerala, in the Thrissur district. The pigs found in the Thrissur district have been infected with African swine fever, and the district authorities have swung into action and have initiated the necessary precautionary measures. They have started culling some of the animals and safely disposing of the bodies. They have started taking quarantine and preventing and sanitization measures, and they have stepped up the disease surveillance measures at the local level to ensure that the spread of the disease is curbed. So what is African swine fever? Why is it a concern? See, first of all, please understand that it's a viral disease. It is caused by a virus belonging to the Asfarviridae family. Alright, the African swine fever virus causes this deadly hemorrhagic disease. It brings hemorrhagic fever that can cause significant mortality rates amongst domesticated pigs. It's very deadly amongst the pig population because of its very high mortality rate. It's highly infectious, highly contagious, spreads very quickly within a pig farm. So it has a huge detrimental impact on the pork industry, the animal husbandry industry, and it can hurt the farmers significantly. This disease was endemic to Africa, the sub-Saharan region of Africa. That's why it's called African swine fever. But today it has spread to many countries, from Europe to China to Vietnam to India. It's important to curb the outbreak as quickly as possible because this will significantly cause an economic loss to the farmers. The pork industry, animal husbandry industry will take a hit. Due to its high mortality rate, high infectious nature, it has a huge economic impact. But otherwise, there is no other concern for humans. It has not shown any zoonotic jump. It does not transmit to humans. It does not cause any disease in humans as of now. So it's not a threat to humans as of now, but it is indeed a big concern for the animal husbandry industry. That is why African swine fever is tackled with utmost priority by the authorities. Next, we have another development from Kerala related to environment and ecology on page number 6. See, Kerala became the first state in India to bring out a people's biodiversity report at the local level. Kerala started this initiative, the state government of Kerala, and it encouraged the local bodies, the Gram Panchayats, the local Panchayati Raj institutions, and even the urban local bodies, the municipalities. They were encouraged and supported by the state government of Kerala to bring out a biodiversity report at the local level. So this is a citizen-led initiative with the support of the local bodies and the government. Now this has a lot of environmental significance. The involvement of the local community in tracking the local ecosystems, in cataloging the local species of flora and fauna, and in pointing out the spread of biodiversity at a district level, at a village level, is of great significance as far as conservation efforts are concerned. Such data books can provide enormous information, wealth of data and information for researchers, for environmental activists, and for government and for policy makers as well, to come out with the right measures to protect the environment, to protect our biodiversity. So in Kerala, the Taza Kara Gram Panchayat at the village level has become the first panchayat in the country to bring out a detailed biodiversity register. a People's Biodiversity Register, PBR. So there could be a standard prelims question: which state in India promoted a People's Biodiversity Register in India? Or which village in India became the first to bring out a detailed People's Biodiversity Register? Such factual standard questions can be asked, so just make a note of this. Now coming to the last article for today, on page number 10, we have a reference to a defense partnership between India and Russia involving the AK-203 assault rifles. It's related to India-Russia relations. India and Russia signed a contract in 2021 through which Russia would transfer the technology of one of the most advanced rifles, assault rifles, the AK-203 assault rifles. And these rifles would be produced locally, domestically in India at a factory which has been set up at Amethi in Uttar Pradesh. This is a joint venture between the institutions in India and Russia. This joint venture, the Indo-Russian Rifles Private Limited, which has been set up in UP, is domestically producing these assault rifles for the Indian Armed Forces and Security Forces. According to this deal, more than 500,000 assault rifles will be produced. Almost 6 lakh AK-203 assault rifles are going to be produced, which will become the mainstay of the Indian Armed Forces and as well as our paramilitary forces. Now, according to the article, more than 35,000 rifles have already been manufactured in India. But initially, in the initial batch, the technology is coming from Russia. Some components are coming from Russia as well. Only the production, the assembly is happening in India. But gradually, over the next few years, the localization content will increase. Gradually, with the transfer of technology, localization content will increase from 5% and it will go all the way to 100%. So in the coming years, 100% of these assault rifles will be produced in India. So this will be a bigger boost for domestic defense production. So Russia is providing the technology, supporting indigenization and localization, and it is going to be a big boost for India's domestic defense manufacturing. This will also solve the problem of Indian armed forces and paramilitary forces, which have been struggling to find a good assault rifle. Especially a security force that deals with urban terrorism, counter-terrorist, counter-insurgency operations. Assault rifles are critical, right? India relied upon the Kalashnikov range, the AK series of AK-47, AK-57 earlier. But the indigenous INSAS variant ran into many problems due to its deficiencies, the defects and inefficiencies. INSAS rifles are being replaced. We did sign contracts with US and Israel as well for advanced assault rifles, but they were seen as more expensive. For example, the 6-war assault rifles from US, the Tavor assault rifles from Israel, they have been procured for Indian special forces. But to equip our large armed forces and security forces, we need lakhs of assault rifles, and we couldn't afford the more expensive variants from Israel and US. So Russia provided the alternative. The AK-203 provides a fine balance between the cost and the features that we are looking for. So this is going to be the mainstay of Indian armed forces and security forces as far as assault rifles are concerned, and they are being produced indigenously in India. And very soon, the localization will reach 100%, which means the entire assault rifle will be domestically produced in the country. So that is what we need to understand from this article. And on this note, I would like to conclude the Hindu analysis for today. Now, before I conclude the session, please note that Unacademy UPSC Summit is coming up. On June 20th and 21st, we are hosting this mega event where top politicians from Nitin Gadkari to Annamalai to many top officials, retired officers will be addressing the aspirants. So do attend this event on our YouTube channel, on the Unacademy platform, and we will be sharing further details in the coming days. So do stay tuned in to our channel for further updates regarding Unacademy UPSC Summit. On this note, I would like to wind up the session for today. Let's meet up tomorrow at 10 a.m. Till then, take care. Have a good day.